Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial. Today I've come out into the woods because it's autumn, there's leaves all over the ground, everything's really beautiful, and it's mushroom season. So I'm going to be looking for some mushrooms to photograph today, and I want to get nice and close, but I also want to create a bit of a fantasy scene using these mushrooms. If I can find the right one, I think I can add a little bit of extra light, maybe some color, to create something a little bit more eye-catching and interesting than your standard mushroom photo out in the woods. I'm going to go and have a look around, see if I can't find a mushroom on a log or in the undergrowth, and see what I can do by setting up some lights. So I've found myself over at this little tree stump. Well, it's not a little tree stump, it's quite a large one, but tree stumps are a really great place to start looking for mushrooms and fungi because they need to be a little bit off the ground so they're not getting trodden on all of the time and they're not getting covered with leaves, but they also need something to latch onto. So all of this sort of mud and moss that grows in between the old tree stump is the perfect place for mushrooms to take root. I found, well, there's a whole side of mushrooms just down here which are sure to be really interesting, but there's a really nicely capped mushroom in this little enclosure created by the tree stump. I think this is going to make a really nice natural background for my shot. Now there's a lot of options here for where to place the camera and what we can do with our lighting. So I'm going to get my camera out, try a couple of lenses. I'll probably have it on a tripod, and then we can add some lighting to see what we can do with this little mushroom scene. So after trying a few compositions and different positions of my camera, I've decided on this really low angle looking up at the two mushrooms inside this little corner of the tree stump. I think this it gives a nice little background to our two mushrooms. It gives a nice foreground with some of the green moss at the front of the image here, and it gives us a low angle on the mushrooms themselves, which means we might be able to pick up some of the interesting detail on the underside of the caps. Now it is giving us a little bit of a challenge as well, because actually all we're seeing here is the bright overexposed cap of the mushrooms and no detail on the underside. That's where our lighting is going to come in. We're going to need to add a little bit of light to the mushrooms themselves and perhaps the scene around it as well to make things look a little bit more interesting. So it's time to bring in a little bit of lighting. I've got the Adaptalux Control Pod 3 here sat on a mini tripod, and I'm just going to position the legs so that they sit nicely on the wood here, and we've got a nice secure seat platform for our lighting. Now we're going to need some lighting arms. The very first thing I'm going to plug in is a white lighting arm with a diffuser. So I want to bring a bit of light underneath these two mushrooms so that we can get some extra light onto the underside. So to do that, I think I'm going to bring in this lighting arm down here. So we don't want it in the shot, but we do want it to bring a little bit of light to the underside of those mushrooms. So I'm just choosing a port to plug it in that gives me enough reach to get the light underneath the mushrooms but not have it in shot. So as you can see there, we've already added quite a lot of light to the underside of the mushrooms. Next, I'm thinking that we maybe need a little bit more light on the back side of the scene just here. So I'm going to plug in another white lighting arm. This is a lighting arm S, and I'm going to bring that just so it shines across the back of the scene here. Now that's going to look really, really bright for the time being, but I'm going to adjust that light downwards so it's really only on 1 or 2%, and that should give us a nice little balance between the foreground and the background. Next, I think I'd like a little bit of extra color in the front here. So there's not a lot of light down in the front here, and it's not really showing off that moss. So I'm going to bring a lighting arm to light up the front of the scene a little bit. Now again, we're overcompensating here quite a lot, but we can actually change the beam angle of this light so that it's really only shining on the parts of the image that we want it to. So narrowing the beam angle, you'll see, highlights that moss a lot more, but we can widen that beam angle and bring a little bit more light in closer to our mushrooms. I'll leave it there for the time being. Now, I did mention that I wanted to add a little bit of a fantasy element to this shot, and I think that's going to be achieved by using a little bit of color. So I've got a green lighting arm here, and I'm going to aim to get this in the background, in this dark little space just here. Again, by using the beam angle control, but also our brightness control as well. We don't want to go overboard with the color, and I don't want it in a spot that is going to look too unnatural. Just a little hint of green. So I'm going to bring that green down a little bit to make it not quite as noticeable, but balanced with the rest of the light. So then guys, I've placed all of my lights down, but I was really only tweaking the brightnesses only very slightly as I was doing that. So I've connected my phone to the control pod, and now I can sit and look at the back of the camera and really tweak the balance between all of these different lights. And for a shot like this, that's really critical, because it's a fine balancing act when you're adding light to a scene that already has some daylight. Although we are slowly losing that, so we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be, first of all, putting the control pod on boost mode. That's just a little flick of the toggle there, and you can see that we've got a lot more light. Now, I'm also going to remind myself that this one is an amber lighting arm, and the rest are all whites, so that's fine. Yes, I did change the green light for an orange one, because the green, although it was nice and fantasy, it did really look very artificial. I think the amber still has that fantasy element, but it's also kind of sunsetty, or perhaps there's a nearby fire. It's really autumny, a nice autumny colour, so amber instead of green. But I do think there is a little bit too much amber in this shot right now, so I'm going to select that amber arm just by tapping it here, and then I'm going to lower the intensity by bringing that slider down. Now, I think just, well, 15–20% of that amber is enough. I can also tweak all of the other brightnesses. So that is our lighting arm that is lighting the underside of the mushroom, as you can see. So we actually want that one nice and bright, almost matching the brightness of the mushroom caps. My other lighting arm over here is affecting the foreground, so again we can choose how bright we want that moss and the foreground to be. I don't want it quite as bright as the rest of the scene, but there does need to be a little bit of light there. And then lastly, we have this really bright light in the background here. That's why it's only on 1 or 2%. Just by tapping the plus and the minus button, I can affect these lights by a tiny amount. So 1 or 2% at a time is enough to make a big difference to a shot like this. If you're having to change your lights by, say, 25% of the brightness each time, or predetermined settings, you can often be stuck between brightnesses that really don't match each other or the environment. So I've leveled out all of my brightnesses using the app here just by looking at the result on the back of the camera. That's one of the huge advantages of shooting something like this with LED lights. You can see what your result is going to be as you build up the scene. So if you're looking to do some sort of fantasy mushroom scene, or you're not too familiar with adding light to a natural scene like this, then certainly some LED lights like these can go a long way. The fact that they're flexible as well means I can place the light really precisely and not just go overboard with adding light to the entire scene. I can add it exactly where it's needed and nowhere else. I'm going to tweak this a little bit more and see what kind of result we can come out with. So the sun is setting on my tutorial for today. I feel like I'm sat by a nice warm campfire as the lights are still going over here. And there's still a lot to be done with a shot like this. I've really only scratched the surface with a single type of shot. You can of course rearrange all of these lights and get a completely different look to your image just by moving the lights around and changing the colors, perhaps changing the diffusion, changing the placement of the lights. And then of course there are many more mushrooms around that you can do this same sort of thing with. So I'd highly recommend going out at this time of year and shooting some mushrooms in the undergrowth. If you have a nice quiet woodland area nearby, you'll certainly find some interesting mushrooms down in the undergrowth or on some logs. I'd like to know from you guys if you take additional lighting with you on shoots like this, particularly this time of year, particularly this time of day where the sun is starting to set. I find it really hard to shoot anything unless there's a little bit of extra light or a little bit of control over the light. Relying on the sunlight is a little bit tricky, especially if it's this time of year. It really narrows the amount of time that you can photograph for. Let me know down in the comments and make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video and learned something. Hit the subscribe button for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration coming in the future. For now, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.